Today in the EU, the next generation of European far-right leaders. Conservative, anti-immigration, and fiercely nationalist, the rise of a young generation of far-right voters is reshaping electoral strategies across Europe. Some of these voters are militant and part of radical youth organizations. What are these organizations like, and how are they training the leaders of tomorrow? Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. In Italy, Fratelli d'Italia militants sing nostalgic fascist song and hail to Benito Mussolini. In France, Rassemblement National Youth talks about the great replacement perpetrated by Arabs. They are not just radical youngsters. They're not relegated to a minority. Some are freshly elected MEPs. Most are lead activists with direct links to stars of politics here in Brussels.
À partir de maintenant, vous faites partie des jeunes avec Bardella. Chacun d'entre vous.
Today, I have the pleasure to welcome in the studio documentary filmmaker Renée Bertini and investigative journalist Luigi Scarano, who documented what happens behind the scenes of far-right youth organizations in France and Italy. Welcome, Renée.
Hi, Giada.
And welcome, Luigi.
Hi.
Let's start from France. Renée, you are one of the co-authors of La Nouvelle Garde, a documentary which follows the lives of 3 French youngsters affiliated to the far right. What can you tell us about the protagonists?
One is Piero Mantione. He is the president of the youth movement of the Rassemblement National party. He was 29 at the time of filming. He is 30 years old now. The second one is Stanislas Rigaud, who is the president of the youth movement of the Reconquête party. He is also a spokesperson for the party. He was 24 at the time of filming.
The party of Éric Zemmour.
Yes, the party of Éric Zemmour. And the third one is Kaina. She was 19 when we were filming, and she is an activist for La Cocarde étudiante, which is a far-right student syndicate.
I think it's interesting that the protagonists of the documentary are millennials and Gen Zs that radicalized and then joined the ranks of the far right somewhat organically through family, books, or TV. And yet, for younger generations, social media plays a crucial role in the recruitment strategy of far-right parties. You touch upon this in the documentary. How important are social media for far-right parties?
I think social media plays a really important role, but not in the way that people would necessarily immediately think.
How so?
Because it's not as simple as that. The way that social media works is it creates a network of accounts that are interlinked, right? And once you start following far-right accounts, you get suggested more and more far-right accounts. And that it means not only far-right personalities, but also far-right media, like Livre Noir or Boulevard Voltaire or Occidentis. And these all kind of interact. They reshare each other's content, each other's materials, each other's keywords, that once you come across it, you can very easily get sucked in.
And what sucks users in is also the personable way politicians use the platforms, right?
For example, if you look at the TikTok profile of Giorgia Bardella, who has a big following. I don't remember exactly the numbers, but...
Yes, that should be around 2 million.
It's pretty huge. The way that he presents himself is literally as being one of the people and being really young. In that way, I think social media allows characters like Giorgia Bardella to attract a bunch of people to him as a person rather than him as a politician. And that attracts all kinds of people. So people that are not necessarily already politicized. Because it's really important to remember that a lot of young people in France are not politicized. So trying to attract that electorate is also very important.
So it contributes in a way to the so-called dédiabolisation, the normalization.
Yeah, exactly. To the normalization. They present themselves as really, smooth, presentable. Mm-hmm. It could be your neighbor or your friend's friend.
Luigi, your reporting on Fratelli d'Italia's youth really makes an argument against normalization. Thanks to the undercover work done by your team, we see footage that highlights the difference in tone, words, and gestures that militants take upon when in front of journalists and when they think nobody is watching? What contradictions have you witnessed?
Our investigation, conducted by Baxter, that is the investigative unit of fanpage.it, tells exactly this kind of double standard. When youth members of the party are in front of cameras, they show a more moderate face. But when no one is watching, they can carry on all the ideas and practices that belong to this kind of right-wing subculture that is very popular in Italy from the 70s to now.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we showed is something that could only have emerged through an undercover investigation. There is no way that all those things could expose themselves in another way.
And what is the relationship between militants of Gioventù Nazionale and the party of Fratelli d'Italia?
The relationship between Fratelli d'Italia and Gioventù Nazionale is very, very close. Fratelli d'Italia is the heir of Alleanza Nazionale and before of the MSI, the Italian social movement, and is the party in the parliament with the longest political tradition and the most classical structure. The young members of the movement, of the party, get in touch with politics in high school, at university, starting from the youth movement. And then the most deserving one are placed as assistant to the party leaders, to the member of parliament, learning how politics works from the inside. So, in short, the militants of Gioventù Nazionale, and in particular those who I talked about, such as Flaminia Pace, Elisa Segnini, Ilaria Partipilo, are not only militants of the youth movement, but also they are the future ruling class of Fratelli d'Italia, and they are the rising stars of the party.
Renée, you and your colleague Arthur Didier Deren touch precisely on this point in the documentary. Can you tell us more about the structured pipeline between youth organizations and far-right parties in France?
Yeah, it's very interesting to study this with reference especially to La Cocarde, which is one of the organizations that we follow, which is a student syndicate. They present themselves as not affiliated with a specific political party, but it becomes very clear that a lot of the people that go through La Cocarde then end up at the Rassemblement National. That's the case, for example, of Pierre Romain himself, who is now a MEP and the head of the Rassemblement National's youth organization. It's also the case of Kaina, another of the characters that we followed. Honestly, a lot of the people that we encountered throughout this whole process that were at La Cocarde also were activists for the Rassemblement National. So, you know, in some way, La Cocarde really works as a incubator for these activists to then move on to take on roles in political parties. It trains them to talk to media, it trains them to defend their ideas publicly. So that's very important.
So you spent around 2 years following far-right parties, youth organizations. How do they function behind the scenes?
Well, those two mainly worked like a classic activism organization. You know, they have campaigns that they bring forth, they try to build up grassroots support, they mobilize on the ground. They have representatives in every French department. And so what they do is try to build up their network horizontally on the ground and vertically networking upwards, but also through media. And the ultimate aim with these kinds of organizations is to bring forth their agenda so that when we take these particular groups is done a lot through a linguistic and cultural battle. What they really try to do is implement and spread keywords.
Well, of course, if you watch the documentary, you will know, but can you give us a few examples?
One of the big narratives of that party is the idea of this grand remplacement, the great replacement, according to which the original French population is being replaced by a external population that is made up of immigrants. So, you know, that is one of the ones they use a lot, which obviously is completely false if you look at numbers.
And as part of the Italian investigation, we see even more shocking claims made by militants that had clear undertones of racism, fascism, and antisemitism. What does the Italian law say about that?
In Italy, we have some laws, such as the Scelba law, that punish expression of fascist apology. So many far-right extremists in recent years have been convicted for making fascist salutes in public, for example.
Mhm.
But then the Italian Supreme Court ruled that when these salutes are commemorative and are not implying the new formation of fascist party, there is no crime. So the Italian justice can punish those fascist salutes. However, I think that the object of an investigative report is not only what is punishable by the law, but above all, I would say, what is relevant for the public opinion. And that's exactly what we did.
Absolutely. Speaking of public opinion, Giorgia Meloni has commented on the investigation here in Brussels at the doorsteps of June's European Council.
I partiti politici riprenderne segretamente le riunioni. Lo sa perché glielo dico? Perché in altri tempi questi sono I metodi che usavano I regimi.
She said that in other times, the methods of your investigation were used by political regimes. Were there any repercussions for the fascist militants within the party that you exposed?
The government did not take any action against National Youth. Neither party leader Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, will take any measure against the militants, and also the leader of the party that we show in the investigation making fascist salutes. So all the people we showed in our two-part investigation are still in their position. The only resignation were from public offices that those people were in charge of, but not certainly from the party. So from this point of view, nothing changed at all.
And similarly, in France, this type of organizations tend to be quite deaf to criticism. What was that like as you were filming?
It's very interesting how they respond to criticism, because a lot of them kind of portray this idea of the far right or their own electorate as being the minority and the victims of a system that is dominated by the left, a system that they say is not open to dialogue and is against freedom of expression.
And just like Jordan Bardella in France, Giorgia Meloni herself grew up politically in the ranks of far-right youth organizations. She then joined Movimento Sociale Italiano, like most of her deputies did. And so, because most of Fratelli d'Italia politicians came from that same background, how likely is it that political figures higher up are aware of the controversial and problematic roots of youth organizations?
Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni claims that the party has come to terms with its past, so there is no connection, there's no real connection between Fratelli d'Italia and those ideas. In our investigation, for example, we show Elisa Segnini, that is a militant of Gioventù Nazionale and a former candidate for Fratelli d'Italia in Bergamo, that describes very proudly herself like a racist and a true fascist. She worked as a member of parliament of Fratelli d'Italia, Ilenia Lucaselli, very prominent member of the party of Giorgia Meloni. Lucaselli said that her former collaborator has always been very precise, very professional, doing her job. And so she probably doesn't really believe in the things she said, and we filmed. I think that we really showed a very obscure face of the youth member of the party. And from the number of recordings we gathered along all the month of our investigative report and undercover investigation, we can say that we show a pattern of behavior that is really natural. There is some sentiment inside the party. For sure, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni wants to get rid of this. But this kind of gesture, this kind of attitude is present inside their party.
Finally, looking onto the future, 2027 will be the year of both French and Italian national elections. Renée, what role will the militants of today play then?
I would say the same as now. They will just keep preparing the ground, training their activists, and keep especially finding smooth, presentable faces to put forth, pursuing their policy of normalization. And this includes making media appearances, training their activists to speak to journalists, because we have to remember that the young activists of today will be the party leaders of tomorrow. So what they do today will set the tone for what kind of politicians we'll find ourselves confronted with later on.
Thank you, Renée. Thank you, Luigi. I'm Giada Santana, and this was Euractiv's Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite streaming platform. It will really help us spread the word about our work. This episode was produced by Miriam Sanz de Tejada, Nicoletta Yonta, and me. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.